Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of a Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather upon here. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Welcome to the newcomers, both to our Facebook group and to our podcast. We love hearing the diverse reasons why teachers across the world are joining. So much deep and creative literacy work going on in schools. Some recent comments that we've had. I'd like to learn strategies for teaching students writing skills to get them more interested in writing. Oh my goodness, one of my favourites. Love that one. I'd like a place to discuss literacy learning and how to best apply what we know to difficult contexts and to hopefully learn about new strategies and resources. From another, I am passionate about nurturing my students to develop a love of reading. I'm a literacy leader in my school and I'm looking to learn and make connections with others in the field. And lastly, I'll listen to the podcast. I love teaching and enjoy sharing ideas and inspiration with teaching communities. So if you're not a member of the Teacher's Toolkit Facebook group, we'd love you to join and introduce yourself to the group. But today, welcome to this podcast called Planning Effectively with the New Australian Curriculum, version 9.0. And welcome back to our co-host, Phil.
Thank you, Sharon. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, great to have you back. Yes, missed my co-host.
Yeah. I miss being on the show.
You miss co-hosting. I know. You were away just long enough for me to take the seat and take over.
Yeah, no.
So, no.
Wonderful.
But in all of that, just going back to all those comments people making about being part of a community, like that's seriously why we started podcasting.
Yeah.
Like we were a little community of two here.
Yeah.
And it is so important having others to be able to talk to about not only your passion for your teaching, but about the profession, about the difficulties, about the challenges, about the successes, about the ponderings and wonderings that we have about things. So we really, really appreciate those who do connect with us, via the Facebook group or through emails or whatever. And, we certainly hope that that's what, our passion and interest and joy in the profession is really translating into each fortnight for the podcast that we're doing.
I love that one that's trying to apply what we know to difficult contexts. That really got me thinking in my early years of teaching where I had some very difficult situations with students that, weren't, were finding learning difficult, and how could I best cater for this diverse range of students. I had year 7, but there were so many at different abilities. How do you do that? How do you differentiate for those ones? And that really got me thinking and going to conferences and exploring readings, and it's still a continuing struggle.
And I think that's what we often say is about that we need to continually be building our repertoire because we need multiple strategies, we need multiple tips, techniques, resources, ways of working with students, but first and foremost, really building great relationships with all our students to let them know that we are there to help them have entry points into the learning each day. And we know that's hard. We know, and we often say, don't we, it's those students who really stretched us as teachers to become better teachers.
Yep. And there are as you go on with your teaching, there are tools and techniques that are better than others. And it takes a while to use those and practice them in your classroom.
Yes.
But there are gateways into better ways of teaching. That's why we're doing the podcast and the various other things we do.
Yes. Yeah. So we thought we'd go for a little exploration today, thinking about the new Australian curriculum. But really it's not just about that this is the new Australian curriculum. It's more, and with a focus on English, because to be honest, we are only talking about the English part of the Australian curriculum.
Of course.
Not that nothing else is important, but because, we've only got time to talk about one part. But it is whatever curriculum we're working with. I think there's been, in our experiences, some really good, I suppose, techniques that we've been exposed to about how to really plan with a curriculum, how to make that an effective part of our everyday thinking about what is it that we are bringing to our students, but not only bringing to them, how are we getting them absolutely active in this learning process that the curriculum puts forth. That's the one thing, not the one thing, but I absolutely love that. Isn't a new thing that I'm saying, but I love the intentional activity that this curriculum drives for learners. It's just full of action. And that's what we're teaching our students, isn't a whole lot of content. We're teaching them how to be active.
Yeah, I think this whole podcast is about how we translate that curriculum into really great day-to-day teaching,
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
I think
so.
sometimes it looks a little bit like theoretical and we're not sure how that would look in the classroom, but that's what we're sort of driving down. We're trying to show how we can translate that into some really effective practice. A podcast can only get to a certain way, but we have other ways. We do videos and those sort of things, but that's what we're really interested in, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I've been reading a book just over the last few days about some of the early philosophers, and there is a particular little what would be the word? I guess process that's really intrigued me in there. And when I read it, I thought, I think that really, I'm having a bit of a moment of connection here, thinking that's probably a process that's really useful to go through in terms of becoming or coming to a better understanding of what the curriculum is all about. And the 4 things that they talked about was that when we're first introduced to something, we build a perception of it. And so, we have, and they describe that as, if you have a picture of that, that's like your open hand. It's large, it's open, and you start building this perception of it. But then as your hand closes a little bit, that lets you begin to start forming conceptions around it. So you're starting to get a bit more refined and really deciding and pinpointing what are some of the concepts here. So it's not just perception now, but what is it that are the concepts that this is getting to? And then the next stage along the way, they said, is that you're really starting to get so much more focused and you're really building a comprehension of it. So perception, conception, concepts, then comprehension. And when you give it that deep, when you really put effort, time, thought, wonderings into that to build a comprehension, to build a deeper understanding of it, then they said that's what gets you to knowledge. So I just loved that I couldn't help but maybe because I knew we were doing this podcast, but I could not help but think of those 4 things in terms of when we're working with our students and we want them to come to a deeper understanding and knowledge of something, we would take them through a process. And right here I thought, I think that's something that we can, this process of learning about what is this curriculum. It's not just what I think we often have. There's plenty of perceptions around the curriculum, and sometimes those perceptions then lead us to look for ways to manage the curriculum by looking elsewhere, by trying to find what resource might link to that because it's got the number on it, that matches the curriculum. And so therefore, what can I teach? And that's when I just have a perception of it, that I think I have to cover this, I think I have to cover that.
But you're not really comprehending.
No, and I haven't really come to understand, I think, all the concepts that the curriculum is talking about. And so when I look through the curriculum, there are certain concepts that stand out to me, I think because they've been part of a long history of learning for me. That, for example, I think it's in the foundation curriculum, and this isn't because it wasn't in the older version of the curriculum. It's still there, and I think that's what lets us know is what's really important. It's still there, and it says this: students engage with a variety of texts for enjoyment. They participate in shared reading. Now, shared reading, and I know from conversations with, that's a question I can ask in any school I go into. What do you understand by the term or the concept of shared reading? And shared reading is defined in many different ways, in as many different resources. And frequently people will say shared reading is when you and I sit together and we share. We're reading together, and so we are like buddy reading. We are engaging in a process together. When in fact shared reading, that very term developed by Don Holdaway, did stem out of children having a replicated experience of sitting with an adult on their lap, sharing a story together. But the term shared reading was then coined as when we can all see the enlarged text and we can share in the reading process because our eyes are on that page and we are sharing that experience with everyone in the class, and we are learning about that reading process through.
It was quite a breakthrough, wasn't it, that Don Holdaway thought of that. He said, here's a parent with their child looking at this text and the child can see the text. Well, let's just translate that to the whole class seeing that text.
Yes.
Just like I would do with my own child.
Yes. Yeah.
How amazing is that?
Yes. And that then allows children to join in.
Yeah.
To join in the process. Because they can see it, they can hear it.
Hear it and see it at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas a read aloud is just hearing it. But it's just wonderful.
So I suppose that's one of those examples of, that's a concept. Shared reading, and an instructional strategy. But I'm just pointing that one out as, we want to read curricula in a way that makes us not just have the perception, but what do we understand about those things, and it's been like they've revised it. It's very intentional what's been retained and how it's been organised. And there's only one principle that I know that really refers to my attitude to the curriculum as being one of fondness. But I can and I'm going to tell a little story here because this is an important piece in what was turning point for me about how to work with a curriculum, having gone through really what I now identify as those steps of a process of, yes, having a perception, really learning about the concepts within it, to really have a deep understanding of it, and then to have a knowledge about it where I felt that it was where I could bring that to my students in a really authentic way.
Making it into actions that are, translating it into actions that you can teach as strategies or actions that the children that can then apply in their own independent reading or writing.
Yes, or speaking or viewing or because that the words in here, I'm just in year 2 at the moment, but this is just the beginning word, the action for every one here in just the language strand, investigate, explore. So explore how language can be used. That doesn't mean tell children how it can be used. Let's teach children how to explore how language can be used. So that's that's a concept, isn't it? Like that we're teaching them how to explore. Yeah.
In fact, our last blog was on teaching high frequency words through exploration.
Yes.
With Di Snowball.
We were talking about this one in the school we were in last week, like use comprehension strategies. That's not teach what a comprehension strategy is. That's teaching them to use comprehension strategies.
Which involves modelling through shared reading or read aloud.
But to then use them. Mm-hmm. So straight away then, I got to see how to use them, and I got to practice that very quickly. Mm-hmm. And when we say quickly, because we talk about that mini lesson being that opportunity to practice with, the teacher as we are working with text, and then I've got the chance to go and use that for myself. I get to experiment. I get to explore how to use it.
That's the exciting bit.
It is so exciting, and it is tangible to see it. When you see students off to go and use this or to go and explore. I'll just keep reading for you. There's identify, understand, navigate, experiment, recognise, create, reproduce, experiment, discuss. I'm just looking for any other words that I might have missed here. Read, create, rehearse, write, manipulate, use, build. So,
and might I just say, Sharon, I'm very impressed with the way you have done some reading in another area, and then you've applied it to how you would then tackle the curriculum. Very clever.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it probably just goes to show I just can't switch off from one thing to another.
But you love reading, and you read widely, and then is it inferring, I suppose, isn't it? The way you connect prior knowledge to another thing that you're doing.
Connections, questioning.
Connection and questionings.
Yes, inferring, I think all of those things where, to try and make sense. And there's plenty that I read where I don't do that, but it's I just could not. That one just was
stood out.
Yes, right at me. Anyway, back to in my fledgling years as a teacher, where I got to work with. In fact, it was a mini course. It was like, I don't know how many. I don't even know if it was such a mini course, but I remember there would have been about 10 sessions of a couple of hours each, looking at what was in South Australia at that time, our new curriculum. And so that was the first time that, well, it wasn't the first time. I have to say the second principal I had was so, that this was an incredible experience. We didn't have, we're talking so long ago, there really wasn't in this school system, a clear curriculum or a standard guideline for the curriculum.
In that era, the schools were encouraged to design their own curriculums.
Yeah.
And it was called school-based decision making.
Yes.
And they created their own curriculums, which was a departure from a central curriculum.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
So that's
and during that time, to create those curricula, we had to write them.
Yep.
And so the principle that we had was, we would meet weekly to after school on top of our other staff meeting, but that was a gift, this actually writing the curriculum and talking about, thinking about how do children learn best in this area of the curriculum. What would we be covering? How do we scope and sequence that? How do we map that out? That was my second year of teaching, and that I found that so profound to be involved in that process. But when it came to there being now a state-based curriculum, I was really eager to learn more about, all right, so this is a move away from own curriculum, so what do I need to know here now? So over these 10 weeks, or these 10 sessions of 2 hours a week, 2 hours a session, it was really doing this process of what's our perception, what concepts do we have here, what do we understand about it, and so what knowledge are we building about curriculum planning? No, not curriculum planning using a curriculum. And one of the most significant tools that came out of that for me was that the curriculum was listed, down in a column on the page with 4 columns next to it. So if you imagine all of the curriculum listed, so just English listed down the page in the categories, and I'm pretty sure we had literature, literacy and language as our categories back then. I feel like we did. Maybe we didn't. Maybe I'm just, we're so familiar with that now. But anyway, they were all listed down there, and then these 4 columns next to each of that. And at the top of each column, first column, term 1, second column, term 2, third column, term 3, fourth column, term 4. And it was developed just as a tool. I don't even remember who created it, but we were given this as a tool, like, would this be useful in our planning? Well, I just ate that up, because what it allowed me to do was for each term to put next to each of the things that I was planning within my units, within my English program, I could tick what was covered in each term and what I brought to the fore. And I don't want to just say covered, but how I enabled my students to be active readers, writers, thinkers, learners in each of those categories. And then term 2, all right, let's go down. As I'm planning, which ones am I intentionally bringing? Now, the very first time I got to look at that was in term 3 of that year that I was doing that study. And it was such an eye-opener for me to see it was late in term 3, what I had not yet covered. And that really shocked me, because I thought, wow, I thought I was pretty good on the planning. But when you look down that list and you go, do you know, I haven't actually brought this to my students yet. I have not given them the opportunity to do this thinking or to do this action yet, to do this investigation or exploration, or to write this, or to read this. And so that has always, that's really stuck with me as...
There were gaps. Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
And
so that's what a curriculum does. It makes sure it broadens out your thoughts about what you have to cover. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
And so, I think at times we can tuck the curriculum away and we go, yes, I know I've got a link to the curriculum. But sometimes we do find ourselves covering the same thing many times and missing some of the pieces that, that aren't there. And so that's one of the reasons. Those of you that might have already used our A3 size English ACARA documents with the curriculum.
Might I point out that they are A4, but you enlarge them to A3. They don't pop out as A3.
True.
We'd like them to, but you have to enlarge them, guys, and it's much better when you do enlarge them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why we actually created those sheets as a planning tool, so that on one page, which is why you have to enlarge it to A3 so you can even read it. But there's the 3 strands of the Australian curriculum there: language, literature, literacy, one page. And that has become, with the schools that we're working with and workshops that we're running, that is the tool that disappears every time.
Where does it go?
Goes home with people.
I was going to say, where does it disappear to?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is it's popular.
It's popular.
Yep.
And then how do people use it? Because it's on a single page, it can be your year's plan. It can be there as a great record for weekly planning or daily planning. I'd say weekly planning more than daily, or unit planning. And so different coloured highlighters at different times of the year to represent different times of the year lets you get a good look at what's being covered and where are the gaps. So it's the same piece as having the 4 columns, but that was on a number of pages. This is single page and this highlight. End of the year, great record for what's covered, great record for report writing time to go, okay, what's covered, what's not, what needs to come on to the next, and being very familiar with what is on the curriculum. So we said this was about planning with the new Australian curriculum, so that's what we've done with the new Australian curriculum.
I was going to say we've done it with the older curriculum, but now, at great expense to the management, we have reduced...
Actually, at great number of hours. It has not been a short, swift process.
A lot of work in it.
But well worth it. Well worth it.
So they've now got these A4 sheets that you enlarge to A3 of the version 9.0 of the Australian curriculum.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we have expanded it this time to, so last time we really had just the content descriptions on the A4 sheet. And this version is pruned down a bit. We have less categories. It's a leaner, but I would say even more active.
Yeah, not leaner because we've cut things out.
No.
It's because of how the
rewrite.
It's more streamlined in the rewrite. Yeah.
Yes. And so once again, we've set that out in the 3 categories: the language, literature, literacy, and it does need to be on the one page because they are all connected. They are what's in one section is feeding into the other section. It's not we don't just pull a one thing. Our planning requires that we are working across. I loved at one of the workshops I did with some early career teachers that as they were looking and sort of becoming more familiar with the Australian curriculum, that they said, it's intentional, isn't it, that literature is that middle strand and really is like the bedrock of, everything is wrapping around.
It holds it together, doesn't it?
It
really?
absolutely does. And I loved how they almost did a bit of a spiral around. They said, wow, and everything just comes back right into literature. Always comes back through there. So we've done the content descriptions again as that A4, but enlarged to A3 because, like I said, it's a very small font. But we've also formatted the level description, so the year level description and the achievement standards.
Which is designed to be photocopied on the back of that.
It could be on the back or it could be a side-by-side piece.
Oh, okay. Yep.
But once again, we've reformatted it and all referenced. We've changed no wording, but just as the Australian curriculum
And
or as ACARA encourages, this is about how can any of these elements be used effectively and how can they be reformatted in ways that will make them, highly usable for teachers in their planning. So
might I just interrupt and say this is about the Australian curriculum, but anyone listening from any part of the world, your curriculum, you could do a similar thing to it.
Yes.
You could format it in this way,
Yes, So that's right. If you're with another curriculum, looking at even going onto Teachific to look at the format of this one, or this will be in the show notes anyway, but looking at the format of it may be a way. So if you're a literacy leader or a teacher, a principal, and you're wanting the curriculum to be really accessible for planning, then this is, I'm not saying it's the only way, but it was well worth putting in days and days into doing the new curriculum because this format had been teachers have just said this is, the tool of choice for planning.
It's easy to access, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Can we say it's been Sharonized?
Shazarized.
Shazarized?
Yes, we could. And I think in reformatting it this way is just such a good way for us to just be reminded all the time. Each time we are planning, I've tried to dot point things in the level description. Once again, in the achievement standards, dot pointing it because I've learnt this from mentor texts. It's a good way to make information highly accessible. So, and giving things some headings and subheadings so that we can see what all these things are. And so it's all very, I hope, much more navigable. Is that the...
Yeah, we might look that one up. What the heck? Yes. This is meant to be a literacy podcast, but, here we go.
To navigate.
Yeah, someone will get back to us about that one. We've had a mind block.
Anyway, I've talked a lot about formatting the curriculum, but that's...
it's a big part of it.
It's about the accessibility, and we know when things are accessible, then it's easier to work with. And as teachers, I know how we just need things to be accessible.
We need the tools.
And readily available. So Australian curriculum, Cara's done all of that work for updating it and reworking it. So I'm pretty excited to have spent the time and learning more for myself too by really looking through in detail at each of the year levels.
So in the show notes, there'll be a link to each of the year levels of these documents that Sharon's created, but we will also put it in the shop as a whole resource where you can just purchase it.
Yes.
Every year level. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's right from, as I said, as a fledgling teacher, I really felt that was a significant piece for me, was to have the curriculum in a working format that really let me I felt secure in knowing ER's really covering things. And as we've also discovered, so working with a teacher today, how we've discovered how much of the curriculum we can use to really develop powerful rubrics for our assessment and knowing what kinds of things we are clearly driving down for our students. I know I've talked about this one before, and I think this is actually highlighted and made stronger in this version of the curriculum. But there is one part in particular that I just want to read from Year 1 through to Year 6. And in fact, now let me start with Foundation, because there's a piece here, and I know you all know that it's there, but this is another part where it's actually really important to have the highlighter out to say which of these experiences have I brought to students. And it's in the level descriptions about students engage with a variety of texts for enjoyment. So I already talked about that one about shared reading for Foundation. So they participate in shared reading, viewing and storytelling. Now, this next one. Spoken, written and multimodal texts may include traditional oral texts, picture books, various types of stories, rhyming verse, poetry, non-fiction, film, multimodal texts and dramatic performances. Now that says students should engage with that, with a variety of texts. It does say may include, but you'd want to get a lot of those in there.
Yeah.
Like at minimum, that's how I always read it, may include these plus others. So if we are asking them to engage in those, it's because we want them to be able to engage with them as readers and viewers and listeners, but we also want them to engage with those as creators and writers. So we can only know how to write in those kinds of ways if we've really engaged in the reading in those. Now, Year 1, let's listen to this one. Texts may include picture books, various types of stories, so just like reception or Foundation, rhyming verse, poetry, non-fiction, various types of information texts, short films and animations, dramatic performances, and texts used by students as models for constructing their own texts.
Fantastic. Yep.
So what are those? Those texts used by students as models for constructing their own texts. They're literature. They are authentic texts. They are rich examples that they can...
Bountiful examples.
Yes. And not only are they exposed to them, it says engage with them. Engage with those texts as models for constructing their own texts. So we're not just letting them engage, we are letting them explore text to know how they can explore any text that would enable them to construct their own texts. Not an exact copy of that, but what features of that? Like, what did that writer, how did they organise their ideas? Or how did they have voice in that text? Or how did they, What was their word choice in there that was so strong and powerful? So that, many of us would refer to that as mentor texts, texts that we can read with a writer's eye.
Yep.
So it's there in year 1. What does it say in year 2? Oh, that whole list of chapter books, rhyming verse, and texts used by students as models for constructing their own work.
Mm-hmm.
Year 3, there it is again, as models for constructing their own work. Year 4, year 5, year 6. In year 6, it says the features of these texts may be used by students as models for creating their own work. So,
and we're also talking about fiction and non-fiction, aren't we?
We are talking about texts across fiction, non-fiction, all kinds of texts. Poetry, chapter texts, dramatic texts, animated texts.
The list goes on.
The list, yes. Yeah. So we can really see, can't we, that the wider those experiences, the more students, and that to me is such a powerful line, because it lets us know that as teachers, we're not the only teacher in the room. Every writer, every book that we bring in is another teacher for our students, that they are using those books as models to help them construct.
We learn from the company we keep.
Frank Smith, thank you. Yes, not you, but yes. Yep. Yeah, Frank Smith's quote, we learn from the company we keep. Now, how did I get there? This is always me, isn't it? I just rabbit away until
Well, we're learning how to plan effectively with the Australian curriculum, aren't we, Sharon? Like, how does a teacher use these A3 sheets to really help them plan, increase the quality of their teaching?
Yes, yeah. Yes, and I suppose what I did want, that's where I wanted to go with it too, is that, even when this is the place for us to go. The curriculum is rich.
Yep.
And if we look at the fullness
of the curriculum,
we see the connections. We see how language, literature, literacy are totally entwined. We see, and right there, students engage with it. Every year level, what's the variety of texts our students engage with? It's our job to bring that to our students.
It's about it being an active planner, because sometimes when we feel like we're short of time, we might go to a resource that's interpreted the Australian curriculum in the way that it wants to do that, and then you just use that resource. But you're missing so much, aren't you, by not being an active planner? Yes, and I think,
and that's our profession. Yep. We are the planners for those who are in front of us. And we know, we can look through that list and go, there are children in my class who haven't had exposure yet to this type of text. It's me that's it's there on the curriculum. I can bring that to them. That's what I think is so exciting about this, is that there's a roadmap here. Roadmap?
Street directory?
Or a shopping list.
And not only are you're becoming a professional where you are really making professional decisions about what's happening in the classroom. Yes. And then if you've got other adults helping, then you're guiding them through this roadmap that you're designing based on this rich curriculum.
I like that word, designing.
Okay.
You're really, it is a design, maybe it's a design brief. These are the things, how can we design? And that's what we do as teachers. We design what our students, both the things that we can see they need, but also the things that will take them further than if we didn't have a
So in your work in schools, are you finding this planning piece is quite the linchpin of success?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if a teacher is wanting to get richer in their teaching, this is kind of the holy grail?
Well, it's an anchor, isn't
Okay,
it, for that design? If we're planning a unit, like let's look across everything, not just the content, but let's look, all right, what kinds of texts are we engaging with and are our students creating? On the achievement standards, what is it that by the end of the year, I mean, that achievement standard list is really, they are the experiences that I am bringing to students for that year. And every child actually has the right to access what is on the curriculum for that year.
Yep.
We need to find entry points for children to enter in that, but because I may be, in a scope and sequence, I might be here, which is lower than my peers, but that doesn't mean that I don't get to access things like poetry because I'm not, at this level here. We need the fullness. It's about the fullness of it. It's all of the things. We can't just go, well, they're here at this level, below year level here on this, and so they get everything from that year level. No, they need, no child is ever just sitting everywhere at one year level. We're all at different places at any point in time.
Yeah.
So
it's also about connecting reading, writing and word work, isn't it? So that we realise that all those things are in service to each other. So it's not about just all these boxes of things I've got to cover. There is a interconnectedness in the curriculum that makes it much more enjoyable to teach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And that's the other piece when we go, how do we fit all of this in the short amount of time that we've got? We fit it in when it's connected.
Yeah. And
because
it's revolving around literature as well.
Because it's all strengthening each other. Yep. It's all actions. Actually, one of the things that I didn't mention before when I said, just how active the curriculum is, and we were talking just last week with the school around this piece, around that when we bring these actions, and in fact, I think we were talking about comprehension strategies, and it says, use comprehension strategies. So if we're going to model how we would use a comprehension strategy, we also want to think, all right, so that's the action that we would use, let's say visualising, or use questioning, or use predicting, or use connecting. But then we also want to say why. We also want to why are we doing that?
That's right. Yeah.
So why am I teaching you, or why am I showing you a strategy and how to use it? Like what does this do for you?
Yeah.
What does this do for you as a reader?
And making that explicit to the learners that this is why we're doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we said, good readers visualise as they read. Why?
Why?
To create images in their mind to better understand
what's going on,
what's happening in the story. Or so we actually did a whole lot of, just like this, going, good readers use visualising to what? To remember, to better remember what's happening in a story, or to better understand a character, or so then it starts. once we push it into that takes us to another level again. Mm-hmm. So the curriculum, what does it say about comprehension strategies? Use comprehension strategies when listening and viewing. I'm in year 3 at the moment. Listen what it says here. To build literal and inferential meaning. And begin to evaluate text by drawing on a growing knowledge of context, text structures, and language features. Well, there's some things right there. Good readers visualise to get to inferred meaning. Mm-hmm. We've got to give a reason, don't we?
And I suppose when you're teaching those strategies and then you're working out the reasons why you're doing it, you can build on that list, and the children can help you build on that list of why we're doing this.
Yes, yeah.
They'll discover things of why we're doing this, won't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're really understanding the actions. Yeah. And if I went back to that list I had at the, what's my perception of a comprehension strategy? Mm. Then how do I begin to form a conception of that? So what's the concept of this? What is it that this is getting at? Now I understand how that strategy, so the comprehension, now I understand what that strategy is doing for me. Now I've got the knowledge. So I thought that was I just love those 4 things. That'll probably become my new
mantra.
Mantra, yeah.
So Sharon, I was just going to ask, we're doing this to make a difference with our teaching, but are there any other connected resources that we could use that would enhance this? I know there's a Fountas and Purnell resource that will help us with our finding what those key strategies are.
Have you been reading my notes? Wavelength.
Yes. We've been working together too long.
I know, one mind. Very good question, because I know myself as I'm sitting here talking about these things, like how do we get to that? How do we build those understandings and that comprehension of it? Yes, I think the Australian curriculum is, or because we're talking that one in particular, is absolutely rich in these actions. And we would always preface, when I'm working with students, I always preface every one of these actions with good readers or good writers or good spellers,
good
readers,
workers. Yeah, good readers use punctuation in their reading, for instance. That's
to help them.
And why?
Why? To help them better understand the story or whatever, or to understand what they are reading or to make sense of. Anyway, but yes, how can I get specific about those things? And there is I know there's lots of, I've tried to find, I've been looking for what's a tool, a resource that I could use that absolutely strengthens my understanding of these concepts. So they're no longer just perceptions then. Now, how do I get into the understanding concept of all of those things? And what is called the Literacy Learning Continuum, and the newest version I think is called Fountas and Purnell's Literacy Learning Continuum.
Or it might be just Literacy Continuum.
No, the new one, the latest one.
Okay.
That's 75 kilo one. Has got for interactive read aloud, shared reading, oral language technologies, writing about reading. It has got, and it's so. If you're using the Australian curriculum, then you're going to see, and you look against the progressions with the categories that are in this book, you're going to see matches all over it.
And it's so comprehensive, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
And in fact, even from the curriculum, when I'm working with the curriculum, the Australian curriculum, we connect each of the boxes on the Australian curriculum with the corresponding section in the Fountas and Purnell curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why would we need, not curriculum, the literacy learning continuum, why would we need that? And for those of you going, oh, you know, Fountas and Purnell, is that something that we're allowed to use or not? It's not a program. Some of you may know of, you know, different programs that might be used. This isn't a program. It is a continuum.
Mm.
It isn't unlike the Australian curriculum scope and sequence. It's just that it has got far more detail. And as a teacher, to be able to plan off something, to say, okay, so it might, let me pick something, year 3 here, plan, create, edit and publish. This is under creating texts. Plan, create, edit and publish. Imaginative, informative and persuasive written and multimodal text. All right. So in writing, in the literacy learning continuum, I can go in there. What are a whole lot of planning strategies? Because how do I just can't say to students, okay, you just have to go off and plan something.
Mm-hmm.
They need the strategies. So what the continuum offers is a whole range of possible planning strategies or actions that we can take. And once again, we can preface all of those with good writers plan in this way to help them achieve this. So that's a mighty resource for all areas of the English curriculum. And then, of course, there are many great, although the teacher I was working with today said, there are so many resources out there, Sharon, that it's so good when you can just point us in the direction of some.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
it is endless what you can get to.
Yes, yes. And the resources that I think empower us most as teachers are ones where we can say, okay, curriculum, this is what I'm chasing down for my year level, for my students. What is going to give me strong strategy lessons that connect literature, language and literacy?
Good question.
And not siloed activities.
Great way to look at it.
Don't bring things together.
Yeah. Great way. That's a real sifting through the resources, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about the resources that, you know, we find most useful for those sorts of things. But today, the big one would be that literacy learning continuum for the detail. I've had so many teachers say to me, that's like the life changer. That's the
detail.
The detail of it. And you don't need, there's a lot of detail. And once again, as a document, highlight things and go, yep, I've covered that. There's great section even in that this is how connected, this is how much that as a resource connects with the Australian curriculum, because a curriculum that values the connection across language, literature and literacy. And that is, so in the writing part of the continuum, which is divided into 4 sections at year level. And that's the other nice piece about it is that it is at year level.
The Fountas and Purnell continuum. Yep.
So in writing, it's divided into 4 categories. They are genre or text types, craft, conventions, and writing process. Now, out of all of those things in that genre or text type section, there'll be all these different types of texts that can be written. at that year level. But they divide that into 2 further sections. So let's say it's looking at, let's just say it's historical fiction. They divide that into understanding the genre. So understanding historical fiction and how it works. So we read it. Understanding and noticing how it works. And the second part is writing in the genre.
So name and notice.
So name and notice as we read, so understanding how this genre works so that we can write in the genre. Now that for me is, like, as a teacher,
it's critical, isn't it?
I can plan. I just feel so much stronger when I don't have to go to 7,000, search 7,000 things and then something will pop up that is this trusted? Is this... Now, I'm not saying this is the only resource in the world. I'm saying this is a resource that I can see matches well to our Australian curriculum, and in working with it with many teachers where they've said it really is that, like, where has this been for me? This gives me more of that detail to go further into the actions, really into actions.
Yeah.
So that would be my resource pick.
My other question here was how do we know we're doing a good job at this? I guess is the sheer engagement of the kids in their learning, isn't it?
Well, I think part of how do we know we're doing a good job in it is definitely what students are able to say about themselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
As learners, and what they're doing as readers and writers.
And what you're noticing in your conferring or roving conferences.
Yes. And actually that's one thing that we haven't talked about is that this works better when there is that strong routine of students reading and writing every day.
Mini lessons.
And having, they've seen a demonstration or the teacher has modelled the thinking and the action and the reason why within text, and that we have had as students the opportunity to go and try that out within text ourselves.
Yep.
And that routine, and that is what allows me as a routine to be able to, whatever my mini lesson is what I can then go in my rove. I can go and see how are children applying that. How is that working for them? Everybody is having a go at that. Everybody is
at their entry point.
Yeah, and everybody's active with that.
Yep.
So that it's, and we often talk about that, that we might say it's a mini lesson, but the teaching has just started.
Yeah.
Not that we teach the whole class together. We're on the spot teaching. But we're also, as I demonstrated to teachers last week, that we don't have to jump in too quickly. We have to let our children have some independence. That's what we're setting them up to do.
Yep. It's not micromanaging them.
No. It's letting them have the go. But we're there with our eyes on them to know, okay, where are they? How much can they give that a go on their own
and
before they need help, and for them to ask for help.
Yeah, and what goals do they want to set?
Yes,
as well,
yes,
isn't it?
yes, yeah.
Or what goals could we set jointly?
Yes. But for them to also say, this is where I'm stuck.
Yeah,
this is where I'm having trouble, and that it should link back to because they should be knowing what they're doing and why.
And then we could start talking about our small flexible focus groups, because that's another podcast and another story.
Well, the Australian curriculum, can set, we'll come back to that. It's very active. And I think we can be active as teachers, and our students can be really active as learners within this, really living a strong readers and writers life.
Yep.
Here with all of, it's experience rich.
Yep.
And that's what we want to bring is that richness of experience. I think that is a wrap. Let's finish there. Thank you, Phil. Thanks for always love being in conversation with you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We've loved to see that so many of you are have subscribed to our podcasts. Oh, do you know, I do usually mention a book, and I haven't. Well, I mentioned a resource book, but Sammy Bailey, she's on the Children's Book Council shortlist this year with her book, The Illustrated Encyclopedia of Peculiar Pairs in Nature. Maybe that's what we are, Phil, a peculiar pair.
In nature.
I loved all of Sammy Bailey's books. An informational text. And where is its power? Its power is in organising formats for organising information and writing about really interesting things. So here she is, having found all these interesting pairings. So we've got a Nile crocodile and the Egyptian plover, who of course do cohabitate, in fact, because
one relies on the other.
One relies on the other. The plover is the one that I'm pretty sure does the teeth cleaning for the Nile crocodile, and is often found in that crocodile's mouth when the vulnerability of that when you're a tiny bird in a crocodile mouth.
Yeah.
The mountain pygmy possum and Heath's tick. But every one of these pairings have got beautiful illustrations. They're Latin names, so they're scientific names. Insets, so fun facts sections, which or sidebars. Sorry, we'd call that a sidebar. The same kinds of information about each of them, so description, diet, location and habitat, conservation status, and what makes them a peculiar pair. Some lovely black and white sketches that go with those things. So books that, once again, there isn't a book that I would bring to you that wouldn't be in some ways a great mentor text, I could read this book with a writer's eye and be a better writer because of it, and I can read it with a reader's eye and learn so much more about my world or myself or others. So the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Peculiar Pairs in Nature, Sammy Bailey, and she's got 2 or 3 others that she's done. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. The Teacher's Toolkit podcast is all about giving you an insider's guide to top teaching ideas, tools, techniques in literacy, teaching and learning. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter via our website. You'll receive advance notice on blogs, podcasts, events and ways to contact us. Thank you, Phil, for joining me.
Pleasure.
And all the best to you and our listeners. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.